Good morning and welcome to the 31st meeting of the Criminal Justice Committee in 2025. We have no apologies this morning and we're joined this morning by Ash Regan MSP. So our first item of business today is to continue scrutiny of the Prostitution, Offences and Support Scotland Bill. Now, we have one panel of witnesses today and I intend to allow up to 90 minutes for this panel, and I refer members to papers 1 and 2. So I welcome to the meeting Siobhan Brown, MSP, Minister for Victims and Community Safety, Anne O'Donnell, Deputy Director, Criminal Justice Division, and Jeff Gibbons, Violence Against Women and Girls Unit Head of the Scottish Government. So you're all very welcome this morning. So just before we start, can I remind everyone to please be as succinct as possible in your questions and responses. So I'll now invite the Minister to make a short opening statement and then we'll move on to questions. Minister.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, Committee. I've been watching with very keen interest the evidence sessions that the Committee has gathered while scrutinising Ms Regan's Prostitution, Offences and Support Scotland Bill. I'm therefore pleased to have this opportunity to set out the Scottish Government's current position on the bill, considering that evidence, and I hope you'll allow me the time just to do so in the Committee. Thank you. Whilst we've taken a neutral stance on the bill and await the Committee's final report, I want to put on record, and this is the first time the Scottish Government has done so, is that we strongly support the principle of legislating to criminalise purchases of sex. This position aligns with our Equally Safe strategy, which is that of commercial sexual exploitation is a form of violence against women and girls. However, I do have significant concerns with the bill as it is currently drafted. This bill, if it was to become an act, would create a criminal law, and therefore it must be clear and unambiguous and have the confidence of Parliament. And let me turn to those concerns, if I may. On the criminalisation of purchase, as I said, we are supportive in principle. However, this must be achieved in a way that ensures that the safety of women is paramount. The concerns expressed to the Committee about forcing activity underground and the subsequent risks to women's safety remains an issue that is not adequately addressed by the bill. Similarly, the bill does not take sufficient account of the reality that the gateway for involvement in prostitution is increasingly online, and that there are strong links in many cases with serious and organised crime and human trafficking. The bill, as drafted, does not engage with these significant issues and would require amending if it was to gain the confidence of the Parliament. The right to support proposed under the bill, and I've said this previously in correspondence, is not well defined. It's not fully costed and it does not take account of the current provision of services. And again, I would point to the need for clear legislation, particularly to allow for adequate financial memorandums, and the bill as drafted does not allow for this in its current form, so there needs to be amendments to outline what support is required, so costs that can be properly assessed. I've already made clear why we do not support the quashing of convictions, and our view has not, and it will not change on that. Convener, given this, I am extremely concerned that there are significant policy and operational challenges with the bill as drafted, and there is a need for substantial amendments to address them. I'm also concerned that there may not be enough parliamentary time left to develop the amendments needed to deliver competent, safe and workable legislation that we can all agree on and have confidence on. Convener, this is not a government bill, and it is for the committee and for the member in charge to decide on how these concerns can be addressed and how to do that. If this was a government bill, at the very minimum to address the clear issues that we've identified with the bill, we would require significant consultation and engagement with the women impacted by this bill, justice partners, including Police Scotland, Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service, and wider stakeholders such as COSLA and third sector organisations who provide the support currently. By way of example, committee members will be very familiar with the time it was taken to develop the necessary amendments to the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Bill to address the concerns raised and the committee's views. While acknowledging that bill was considerably broader, it does highlight that without the time to develop the policy behind the amendments, we would not have had a workable bill. Convener, anyone who puts forward a member's bill knows that there's a lot of hard work behind it, and I thank Ms Regan for all the work that she has done thus far. This is a very emotive issue, it's sensitive, it's complex, and it's important that we get this right. As elected representatives, we have an obligation to scrutinise all proposed legislation, be it members' bills or Scottish Government bills, and to address concerns that are raised during the parliamentary scrutiny process. The issues that have been raised with this bill, as drafted, cannot be ignored. They must be addressed adequately by the members so that we have a clear, workable bill to vote on as legislators. I'd be interested in the committee and Ms Regan's views on how to address the issues that has been raised with the committee from the government and stakeholders ahead of stage 1 debate. Convener, let me conclude by saying, as has always been reflected in much of the evidence available to the committee, that legislation alone will not address the fundamental reasons why women turn to prostitution in the first place. And this government is also tackling those fundamental societal issues within our powers, including the cost of living, addiction, inequality and poverty. Scottish Government will continue our work to tackle violence against women, to support women to exit prostitution, to support Police Scotland with their Operation Begonia approach, which recognises that those involved in prostitution are victims and signpost them to support to enable to exit from prostitution should they wish to do so, whilst at the same time tackle curb crawling and exploitation. We have been clear this is not the end of our work around commercial sexual exploitation, and we will build on that work using what we have learned. Convener, I'm happy to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. So a lot for us to think about and perhaps cover in our lines of questions. I wonder if I can just open up questions with a fairly general one that relates to the Equally Safe strategy, which has been embedded for quite some time across Scotland. And that strategy includes provision with regard to prostitution, recognising, as you say, that it is a form of violence against women and girls. So I just wondered if you can maybe just set out a little bit more detail with regard to the approach taken in Scotland already around tackling prostitution within the context of the Equally Safe strategy.
Yes, thanks, Convener. So, yes, it explicitly states in our Equally Safe strategy that prostitution is violence against women and girls, and that has helped us with our strategic approach to challenging men's demand that was launched in February last year. Going on to some of the points that it aims to do is to firstly challenge men's demand, to put support in place of people that have experienced of commercial sexual exploitation and to help them exit if they wish to do. Also to raise public and professional awareness of women with experience of selling or exchanging sex, that they are victims of exploitation, and also the importance of stakeholder engagement when people also with lived experience to inform policy moving forward. If I could go and just give you a little bit of examples of what we're doing with the strategic approach at the moment, it is to challenge and deter men's demand for prostitution on improving access to support for women, from crisis support through to the longer-term support as well. And this reflects the complexities of the issue associated with prostitution and the need for a multifaceted approach. On the ground now, we are working with Police Scotland to support the implementation of their new national approach to prostitution, which is Operation Begonia, and it's designed to route women with experience of commercial sexual exploitation to support services as opposed to being charged, and sees police more evidently using the powers currently available to them to challenge men's demand. If I may just give you some of those stats on Operation Begonia from last year. Apologies. So, Operation Begonia has been going on in Aberdeen for many years. It's now in Dundee, Edinburgh, and also in Glasgow under another name as well. But with the latest update from Police Scotland on Begonia, there's been over 114 patrols. They have warned 171 males. They've charged 48 males, and there has been in excess of 250 intelligence logs, importantly, where women consented, 79 men were referred to support. So I hope that just sort of gives you that there is a lot more work going on, but that's sort of what we're doing at the moment with our strategic approach.
Yeah. Thank you, and I am familiar with, as a North East MSP, I'm very familiar with the brilliant work that's been going on in the City of Aberdeen for quite some time now within Operation Begonia, some really fantastic multi-agency partnerships and work there. I think in some of your correspondence to the committee, there was reference to potential sort of development, if you like, of Begonia. I might be wrong in that, but I think I read that there was potential for Begonia to be sort of further sort of developed. But be interested in what, if any, other plans the government has with regard to reforming the approach to prostitution that's sort of separate to the bill that we're scrutinising today.
Yes, so the plan is to roll out nationally Operation Begonia. As I said, it is in 4 places at the moment, and get the support in place. And it will also, and I know that you had the police give evidence in a previous session, it's how to also, one of the challenges here is how to get confidence of people in prostitution to trust the police, and I think that's something that they've been working really hard on since we've implemented this strategic approach last year as well. So the aim, long-term aim, is to get that rolled out across nationally. I know potentially there could be legislation in the future or this bill, but at the moment we are concentrating on getting the support in place for people who are wanting to exit prostitution, because it's a very, very complex issue.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I think just a very quick final question relates to the issue around tackling men's behaviour. So again, that's been sort of referenced in some of the evidence that we've heard. So just interested in what, if any, work is going on by within government with regard to that particular sort of aspect of the overall sort of approach to tackling prostitution.
Yes, and I think that's at the crux of it, is like how we get that societal change, that it's unacceptable for men to use women's violence against women and girls, and so there is a lot of ongoing work in that that area with Police Scotland as well. I don't know, Jeff, if you've got any further information that you'd want to...
Yeah, happy to add to that. As part of the broadening out from Begonia from a localised to a national concept, which is one of the key changes for Begonia in terms of a national strategic approach and consistency of approach, is the education aspect. So we're working with education colleagues to do more work around producing products and leaflets, both for public consumption, but also for those involved in prostitution, and also working with institutions to ensure that the staff are appropriately aware and able to manage appropriately, and therefore the experience they get is proper. And there's clearly been issues in the extent to which some of the other organisations that haven't necessarily formed part of the support network, but are national organisations, haven't really ensured their staff are sufficiently aware, both in terms of language, engagement and behaviour. So that's quite a significant change. I think one of the other things we're also doing is around data gathering. So one of the issues that's always been, and there's clearly, this is one of the elements from the Emma Caldwell case, for example, the gathering of data and the sharing of data between support organisations and the police, and that also will inform some of the educational work we do as well. But that's quite a significant development of retaining confidence to report to the police and see that appropriate action early, so they kind of know what it is.
Thank you. That's a good update to hear. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to open up questions and I'll bring in Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and panel. Minister, according to the policy memorandum, this bill's remit is to reduce the amount of prostitution in Scotland, and it will do so, according to your letter of 23rd of June, by tackling men's demand and tackling commercial exploitation. Now, this committee, as you'll have seen, has heard conflicting evidence on whether these provisions, and specifically the new offence in Section 1, will achieve these ends, and especially the suggestion that it won't reduce demand. Based on the government's interrogation of evidence, especially international evidence, does the government think that this bill's core provisions will achieve the aims, and if so, does the government support this bill in principle?
So at the moment, firstly, I'm going to say we are staying neutral at this stage. I've been watching all the evidence sessions with great interest. I am aware of the conflicting issues from both sides and the concerns that have been raised. I don't think it's a silver bullet criminalising purchase of sex. I think we've got to look at it in a more holistic view of support, and also I know that we have been looking at all the international models that have implemented this, and again, there's conflicting views on how that's working in different countries as well. So I think, in my personal view, there is still a lot of work to be done. As I said, the Scottish Government is not against criminalising purchase of sex, but we need to get it right. And I can't see anywhere in the world at the moment that is doing it right, and this is where we are currently focusing on the support and exiting of prostitution and trying to change that societal change in men's demand.
Let me press you on that, Minister. If you have been looking at the international evidence, what does the government conclude as to whether this will reduce, whether provisions such as this will reduce the amount of prostitution in Scotland and tackle demand?
The conclusions to me are unclear that it is not working internationally.
Forgive me, I didn't quite understand that answer.
You're asking me if the Scottish Government thinks that the international examples are working with criminalising purchase of sex?
And would map onto Scotland to achieve the same end?
Yes, and I'm saying the international examples, and I think it's been given evidence at committee as well, is that it's not 100% working and there are challenges with the implementation of this legislation internationally.
Thank you. So the committee's also heard evidence that key provisions of this bill, again, particularly Section 1, would impact on the safety of people selling sex. Does the government share those concerns? And if so, in what ways does the government think that the risks would be increased? And is there anything, going back to your earlier remarks, that could be amended, does the government think at this stage, that would reduce those? Yes.
So women's safety, to me, has to be paramount. And I, from evidence sessions and discussions that I have also had, I've had genuine fear from women who are involved in prostitution at the moment that they will become more endangered. I don't think their voices have been in the conversation thus far, and I think moving forward we have to have their voices around the table in this legislation because it is impacting them, and work out if there was legislation moving forward, working together on how we can do that safely so we do not put any women further in danger.
Understand. Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Jeannie Hepburn, followed by Kitty Clark.
Okay, thank you. Can we just picking up on the issue of safety? I mean, this has obviously been a substantial concern certainly for me, and I think all of us on the committee. And again, going back to one of the evidence sessions we had, someone did make the point that you can never make the selling of sex truly safe. I think I was very taken with that point. So I suppose the fundamental question for us is whether or not this bill makes it less safe for those who are involved in the selling of sex. There's been conflicting evidence, but there's definitely been a concern expressed. So there's a very least a perception that it could do so. I just want to get a sense from you, is this the uppermost concern that you have in terms
women's
of
safety?
assessing this bill?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. That's my main concern. And as I've said, this is a really complex issue. Lots of vulnerable people involved in this appreciate and understand this is violence against women and girls and exploitation, but we have to ensure that we do not put any women in any further danger. And there is a possibility, and I appreciate there's conflicting sides on both sides of this argument. So it's not clear-cut, and I don't think anybody, well, I personally, watching the committee sessions, could not just jump to one side, because both sides are passionate and emotive, and this is where I personally feel there's further work to be done. But I don't want to put any women in any further danger.
No, I mean, I think that's certainly my uppermost concern. I think that of it has been difficult, to, as you say, in terms of the conflicting evidence that we've heard, but there has definitely been that concern expressed. It's actually just before I turn to the question on your remarks about the need for substantial amendments, come to that in a minute. So just in terms of picking up again on the Deputy Convener's questions around demand, I mean, the bill is obviously predicated on reducing this, and there was Liam Kerr's question was around international evidence. You did cite in one of your letters, forgive me, I think it might be the one of it was the one of the 29th of July, you mentioned in the Irish experience, their Justice Minister set out that their own review highlighted that demand had not decreased under the Northern Model. So I guess the question is there engagement with other jurisdictions? Is there dialogue with other jurisdictions to try and understand what their practical experience has been? It's one thing.
Yes,
at
absolutely. I'm aware of that report that came out in March from Ireland, but I'm also aware of what was said in the committee that was conflicting evidence there as well. So, I'll bring in Jeff, because Jeff does liaise with all different governments in the prostitution legislation, so he can give you an update on what we're actually doing there.
Well, we've been in contact internationally for some time with lots of different countries about their experience, and one of the challenges, as you highlight, is there is conflicted evidence, and I don't want to be picking any particular one, but certainly from the engagement we've had, the highlighted challenges between the rationale adopted for pushing forward legislation, the principle of legislation, and the challenges thereafter in implementation, and at least two of the countries that have looked to adopt aspects of the Nordic model. I've had to reflect on that and make changes since. They were still ongoing. We had particular contact with justice colleagues, obviously, around the issues for the police, and certainly they are ongoing in the Republic of Ireland, particularly around the challenges of online activity, which the Nordic model, given the time in which it was initially established, doesn't necessarily translate to a very moving and changing scenario there. We're also aware from discussions, for example, in Sweden, that it hasn't seen, and this is from the police and the organisation we deal with, a change in culture within Sweden. Indeed, have seen activity move, men moving when they go overseas, still purchasing sex. So there's been some concern there about how that's worked in practice. Again, I don't want to pick and choose which pieces of evidence to suggest, but it just throws out that broader question around the steps in the Nordic model about ensuring sufficient safety in place first to negate the concerns about then if you bring legislation to criminalise. And again, I think one of the aspects I would highlight is the challenge in delivering on those services, which, again, in the French example, which we learned, there were huge challenges with social housing perception, but that was part of their model, and therefore they've not been able to deliver on that. So that's been part of that broader discussion. So it's informing both our consideration of future legislation and how that might work from the police's perspective, but also that broader challenge around the support element.
But there is that direct engagement,
yes,
not just relying on seeing what the reading.
No, we have regular conversations, and also with colleagues in France as well, particularly which is often cited as an example. That's
useful to understand. That maybe something we may want to hear more about in due course. Minister, you mentioned that there would be a need for substantial amendments to this bill to satisfy your perspective that the fundamental principle is correct in terms of supporting criminalising purchase of sex, but for that to work in an effective manner. Can you set out a bit more as to what you mean by substantial amendments being required?
Yes, I think about the support detail. We need more detail about that. If this was a government bill, and quite rightly, I'm sure you'd be scrutinising me, asking how long support was going to be put in place. Are we paying for rent? Are we paying for council tax, childcare? What happens if the woman chooses to go back to prostitution, come back out for support in 3 months' time? What's the timescale? These are the kind of questions that, as a government minister, I would expect to be able to answer. I need, and I think that the MSPs also need to have the detail on how much this is going to cost and what support is in place for good legislation for us to vote on and have confidence in. And at this stage, we don't have that detail.
Just one final question, if I may, is on, you mentioned your concerns about the provisions around quashing convictions. I know other colleagues want to come in on that, but mine's a very specific question because the contrast will be drawn with the Post Office Horizon System Act, and I wanted to just understand better what it was meant in your letter of 29th of July. Well, perhaps I could set out what my understanding is and see if that tallies with what you're saying. So you said in relation to that Act, the convictions involved in those cases could not be considered as safe. I suppose what you mean by that is that, you know, put into one side if I can for a minute, whether or not it should be the law or otherwise in terms of convictions under Section 46 of the Civic Scotland Act 1982. You know, that's the fundamental question, of course, but as the law stands, is the point there then that the convictions in those cases could be considered safe, whether or not we think it should be the law?
Yes, okay. If I can just tell you my my reasoning for the not questioning. Now, whilst we acknowledge that a legitimate debate has to be how criminal law should operate in respect of prostitution in the future, this bill currently, if it was quashing was to be supported, would encroach on the role of the independent criminal courts by quashing legally sound convictions. So we know with the Post Office there was no sound convictions, and it was a very unique situation with the Post Office. So such a move would be unprecedented in recent Scottish history, and while Parliament has acted as the repeal of the offences relating to offensive behaviour at football matches historically, the relevant legislation did not quash the convictions. This is because they were legally sound convictions achieved under the law of Scotland at the time. So Parliament can change the law for the future, but should not revisit independent criminal court decisions, as this would significantly impact the independence of the court system. If I could just maybe touch on the Post Office. When that was passed, that Act in 2024, there were prescribed conditions that were met. However, the fundamental difference between these is that it was the convictions were tainted by the IT system that wasn't functioning. So this was a very exceptional step by Parliament, quashing the convictions, and was taken to ensure that victims could speedily access justice and be able to receive the UK government compensation for the horse harm by the use of this. Another thing, and I'm not sure if this is appreciated, as an unprecedented step was taken, the costs that were involved with that Act for the Post Office were £4,000 per person for quashing them, which is considerably a lot of money per person. So that's another, I think, in the bill that Ms Regan has put forward. I think there might be, is it 10,600 previous convictions. So it's not something, and also with the independence of the judiciary, is that the Scottish Government, and I know the Lord Advocate, would not support.
Okay, that's helpful to understand.
Kitty Clark, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you very much. And Minister, you've said this is a difficult issue. Would you agree with me that it's an issue that's been put in a box called too difficult for a long time, and that we have legislation before us today, before this Parliament, which you said in general terms you agree with, and that you agree with the general principles of the various provisions, but you believe amendment is necessary. as the significant concerns about the drafting. So would you agree with me that it's our responsibility to try and work with this bill to try and get those drafting in the right place? Would that be something you would agree with?
That is something I've got concerns about the amount of amendments that may be needed. Your point about putting it in the too hard box for too long. I think we have to acknowledge that even from when the Nordic model in 1999, we are living in a different world in 2025 because of the online aspect of it. And this bill that currently doesn't take cognizance of the online factor, which we know is a growing trend, and we need to see how we tackle that. And also, as we legislate for future legislation, in 5-10 years, there might be something that we're not even aware of at this stage.
That may be the case, and it may be that the government may want to come forward with further legislation in due course. But you've said that the Scottish Government supports the creation of a criminal offence which prohibits paying for sex. Are you suggesting that something's happened that's changed that view?
No, it's part of our equally safe strategy, and we see it as a form of violence against women and girls. We have never been opposed to legislation. It just has not. We have been focusing on the support and looking at international models of legislation, how they're working, how they're not working. And this is something that the work that is ongoing. And we are not opposed to legislation, but we want to do it right.
And you were asked by Jamie Hepburn whether you believed that this bill would make matters less safe for women. Are you suggesting that the provisions in relation to the criminal offence that would prohibit paying for sex would make things less safe for women?
I think it potentially could be, and I think we've had evidence from women regarding that as well. I don't want to go into the detail because I'm sure you've heard the detail on the reasons why, but yes, from what I've heard, I think it potentially could.
Well, I think it would be helpful to get some detail. Why you think that?
Yes, okay. One women that are currently choosing to be involved in prostitution, and if they have clients come to their house, they have security so that they can have their ID, passports, credit cards, things like that.
So it's the issue around about checks. That's the issue that you think needs further exploration and further discussion.
Yes.
Thank you. And in terms of the provisions relating to the quashing of existing convictions, can you clarify what the Scottish Government's position is about the pardoning of women who have such convictions?
Yes. So pardoning as well is something that I know we have done this previously. It only becomes an active consideration if the activity being pardoned is not decriminalised as well. It is also something, I think, from the 2018 Pardoning Act, we need to do further engagement if we were to do that.
So can I have clarification then? Is the Scottish Government in favour of decriminalising women who are involved in the sex trade? Is that something
that's something we're not looking at the moment, no.
OK, because that's obviously part of this bill. So have you got a position on that?
We're not supporting that at the moment.
You're not supporting that at the moment, and therefore, so you're saying that women should continue to be criminalised.
It's something,
and that's the reason that you wouldn't support either the quashing or the pardoning of previous convictions.
And also, with the pardoning, it is complex, and this is where we have to have more engagement regarding it. Because if we did decriminalise, just if you can just let me get my point across, then there would be nothing against the law. So the police really wouldn't have any powers to come in for the buyers or the purchasers at this stage.
Yes, I understand that. I understand
so that's also putting the women in a little bit more danger.
So are you saying you don't support decriminalisation? Is that what you're saying?
No, not at the moment.
So at the moment you're willing to accept a status quo, which is that the perpetrators, who in general are men, are behaving in a lawful manner, and the women involved in the sex trade are criminalised. Do you think that's acceptable?
I think we have to look at the safety of women, and I've had discussions which potentially...
Well, I've asked if it's acceptable.
If it's acceptable. We're doing everything
in your
we can.
opinion, is that acceptable?
Where we currently are at the moment, we are doing our best to ensure that women are kept safe. We will not be doing anything or ruling anything out where women were not were put in any further danger.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Pauline McNeill, to be followed by Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Good morning. I confess I've been listening to the answers, Minister, you've given, particularly Liam Kerr, about what the government's position on the criminalisation of the sale of sex, either buyer. Totally acknowledge what you said about the world has changed, and totally acknowledge what you're saying about women's safety. But are the government in favour or not of a criminal offence? Maybe not this bill, but are you in favour of criminalising at all or not?
In the future, it's something that we would consider, as we said. We see it as a form of violence against women and girls. It's an equally safe strategy. It's not something the Scottish Government has been working on legislation, but it's something that we're not opposed to in the future.
So you're not opposed to criminalising in some form the sale of sex?
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you. I wondered if, I don't know, maybe Jeff Gibbons could answer this. Has the government done any background on what the factors are in driving women into prostitution or into the sex trade? And we have heard offline from some women who are involved. But I wouldn't consider we've got a full picture of what's driving women. There's various factors, but I wondered if the government can share any data as to why that is.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, that's the genesis behind the strategic approach, in recognising that criminalisation in its own is not going to solve the reasons why it's driving women into prostitution in the first place. So it's very much about ensuring that the issues that are poverty, housing, many of the issues that have been identified and lots of the correspondence that you received from evidence from other organisations is addressed first. So that support network is in place to then be able to support any then further moves to legislate. So that's been the focus more. So in instances where criminalisation has come in, where that support network hasn't worked, doesn't address the reasons why women are there in the first place. So in part, we're looking at the focus on ensuring the support network's in place first, which will then drive the kind of legislation we want thereafter, but also to inform what we need to change societally, which that addresses the reasons why they're turning to prostitution in the first place, so whether it's drug addiction, poverty, etc.
So the reason I'm asking that question, so for example, so we have heard it's poverty, that would bear out the data that you have.
Yeah.
So is that because benefits are too low, or is it because of the? I mean, I don't know anything about the earnings of someone. It's
multifaceted. In part, it's some of the challenges for women involved in prostitution to access services or how these services engage with them, and that's part of the work we've been doing to ensure, for example, employability. So when they're approaching for employment, that the individuals involved in that can support them, direct them to the right places, ensure that the concerns they have around employability, and that goes back to criminal offences type issues, are addressed as part of that process. It's about making sure that workforces, the stigma attached with prostitution, the judgmental attitude a lot of organisations have, is addressed. So therefore they are engaging. Part of the challenge is we know some of the women will already be engaging with statutory services, but that's not necessarily recorded or accounted for, and that's part of the data gathering we need to better understand. But it is part of how they access existing services, how they respond to that. But it's also about driving the initial reasons why they turn to prostitution, not why so as much as we want to tackle and enable sustainable exit for those involved in prostitution, that should drive policies to ensure that they don't need to turn to prostitution in the first place.
Right, okay, so that's why well, that's why I'm asking the question, but I am not aware of the data. Does it show, what you're saying is the data shows that primarily women are in poverty, as opposed to they can earn a lot more money than an ordinary job, I suppose, to put it like that.
Can I just...
Did you see what I'm asking?
Can I just came in because I had a briefing last week from Linda Thompson from the Women's Support Project, and she does a snapshot every year. So she was giving me a preview of last year's snapshot, and it goes into, I think it was 100 women that she was looking at across Scotland, and it goes into the complex areas, poverty, drug addiction, mental health issues, and it's a very good report. So I think the committee would be beneficial to see that report.
Yeah, but from the government's point of view, you're basing, obviously, your Violence Against Women strategy, but your approach is also based on the view that women are in poverty primarily, and
I think it's complex. It's not just about poverty. It's mental health issues, addiction.
So in other words, to get women out, if that's to get out of it, these are the issues that need to be addressed. Yes. Right, okay, thank you very much. And do you think that prostitution is effectively decriminalised then at the moment? Because if we don't have a law at the moment to criminalise the buyer, and we've heard from the Crown that there are very few prosecutions of women, is it effectively decriminalised right now? Is that where we are?
And I think from our conversations and the work that's going on with Police Scotland at the moment, they're not targeting the women, they're targeting the men.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a concern that effectively where we are now is that we've decriminalised because we don't have anything to prosecute men with?
Yeah, I think our initial, this is the thing, going back to it's a complex issue. We're not seeing any examples anywhere. I don't know, Anna, if you wanted to come in, because you're just going to come in very
briefly to refer back to the statistics that the Minister referred to earlier about Operation Begonia. So there are charges against men as part of that operation. So there are legal routes to charge, not the precise offence that's been suggested here.
What are they charged with then?
But there are different offences.
There's quite a few running a brothel, trading in prostitution. There's quite a few.
Right.
One of the challenges around the approach previously was the police being seen to use the powers they already had, and that's part of the reason we have engaged with Police Scotland for that national approach. But as part of that, in terms of soliciting Section 46 and other, they are clearly treating the women as victims, quite rightly so, as part of that, and that's where that engagement and signposting support services comes in. As part of that approach, but they are the police are more utilising their powers more, and part of our discussion with them is.
So there's existing legislation that could be used better, but pretty much
applied, I think
been organised.
Yeah, and also that will drive what additional legislation or change or powers they may need to address the the changing dynamics of prostitution.
Just lastly, I just wanted to be clear. When you say in your submission potential challenges in enforcing the proposed new offence in the bill. What you've said to the committee so far, is that what you mean when you say potential challenges in enforcing proposed new offence? What does that mean?
I think from what that takes is also from listening to the police is they're supportive in principle, but it's also looking at how it's going to work operationally moving forward. So that's what I mean.
Do you mean setting charges against men
under the
buyers?
Police, yes.
Yeah. You buy.
Yeah.
Because did you mean proving the offence or?
Yes,
sorry,
I think that's the main issue from the police's evidence was in terms of how you would prove the offence and at what point the offence can be said to be completed. So that seems to be the main issue that the police were raising as an operational difficulty.
But is there a way of fixing that with amendments? If that's the concern, that evidentially it would be difficult to prove.
I think that would be something.
If you can't, then you'd have to draw the conclusion that there would be no way of drafting it.
I think that would be something we need to continue to discuss with justice partners, just as we would want to discuss other powers that may be necessary to address the actual.
Are you talking
issues.
about as Ash Regan's bill is drafted at the moment?
From what the police evidence was saying, I took from that they thought that would present evidential challenges, particularly in terms of when the offence is completed, how that would be proved.
But it could be done a different way.
Potentially, as I said, it's not a government bill, so we've not looked at that aspect in particular.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can maybe just come in just to follow up Pauline McNeill's line of questioning, just with regard to one of the provisions in the bill, which is obviously for the repeal of the offence set out in section 46 of the Civil Government Scotland Act, which is criminalise the street prostitution. Yeah. I think just given the line of questioning and your responses there, is the Scottish Government supportive of the repeal of that particular?
So at the moment, yes, the Scottish Government feels that repealing section 46 of the offence of those selling sex would require further consultation with stakeholders and communities, given the sensitivities and the complexities with prostitution.
Okay.
I can go on about further work if you'd like me to.
We'll maybe come back to that if there's time. Keen to let other members come in. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Sharon Dowie, then Rona Mackay.
Good morning. Probably following on from Pauline McNeill's line of question, have you had any discussions with Police Scotland and the Crown Office on how an offence of prohibiting paying for sex might be effectively policed and prosecuted, and what were the outcomes of any such discussions?
So yes, we engage quite regularly with Police Scotland, and not and especially with Operation Begonia and with the Crown Office as well. Might bring Jeff in he's the one who has these discussions as well. So.
Yeah, we have regular contact and engagement with the police and Crown about the use of existing powers and where we might lead to, where police would potentially wish enhanced powers or new powers. And that's part of that broader engagement about what potential legislative change may come in the future. So it's an ongoing discussion we have with them, predicated, as I indicated before, about the focus at the moment on providing that sustainable service provision to support any legislative intervention. So it's an ongoing discussion with police.
So are you confident that as drafted we would be able to get prosecutions? We've obviously heard from some witnesses that are saying that they're not supportive of bringing in criminalisation, so I'm just thinking whether we would actually be able to get statements from the women concerned. So if we don't have statements from the women, would the police still be able to get a prosecution?
At the moment, clearly, as the Minister outlined, they're supporting principle for that. Broader discussions around how that offence would work in practice is subject, obviously, to the consideration of the bill. So we're talking around how we, as part of the strategic model, what legislation may we require to help to address the challenging demand element. But we haven't got into detail about specific provisions within the bill.
Can I just, if I may, just some of the points that you raised, and I know it's been raised at committee with the Sentencing Council as well, and these are the kind of things that we really need the member to come forward and how these are going to be fixed moving forward for the bill to be workable.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Your letter to the committee on the 23rd of June refers to the international challenges being faced in terms of enforcement of the legislation. Particularly, you mentioned the Scottish Government is well aware of the challenges that online aspects have posed in relation to enforcement and policing. I mentioned online a wee bit earlier on. Could you tell the committee exactly what you mean by online aspects that are causing troubles for policing? The criminalisation of buyers?
Yes, so we all recognise that the digital and online landscape is a critical battleground in the fight against commercial sexual exploitation, and it's important that our approach as Scottish Government in this area is adaptive and responds to the changes, which I do not feel at this stage the bill is addressing. I think you heard from Police Scotland where just how it's going to work operationally. I think the figure was, the calls they had in 1 year was 966,000, and how they would manage to investigate every single call for that. As I keep saying, it's very complex, especially with online. There's no silver bullet. It's always evolving. It's something that we have to be on top of. I know that the regulation of the internet is a reserved matter to the UK government, but I know that my officials are continuing to liaise with the UK government on the relevant aspects of the crime and policing bill, where they could stop IP addresses and things like that. So there is ongoing work with the Scottish Government and the UK Government on how we tackle this. But in saying that, we could have a new challenge next week or the week after, but we're continuing to work with this.
Okay. Moving on to the financial memorandum. What are your views on the estimated costs set out in the bill's financial memorandum?
Yes, so I think I've touched on this. I do have concerns that they're not realistic because of the detail, especially within the support aspect of it. We need to have more detail for the financial memorandum at this stage. I don't know how much that would be. I know that it's to come from current funds from Equally Safe, which is already allocated. So I think there has to be more detail to come from the member moving forward and how much this bill is actually going to cost, because we want legislation moving forward to be affordable and workable.
So, based on the Scottish Government's existing strategic work to tackle prostitution, approximately how much could the Scottish Government dedicate to delivering assistance and support?
So at the moment, through the Equally Safe Fund, we have committed just under £22 million in this financial year. That money is fully allocated at the moment to other services. We have funded, as comment to Police Scotland with Operation Begonia for work as well, but there's support services and everything is all through Delivering Safe.
Right. And final question. You did mention earlier on about the right to support not defined and it wasn't fully costed. You've also said about substantial amendments that would be required. It would require significant consultation. You've said that you had a neutral stance on the bill, although you agree with the aims of it. Yeah. But you've also said about not enough parliamentary time to get the right amendments through. So is it that the government are supportive of the aims of the bill, but maybe not in this term?
We are supportive of the aims of the bill. As I said, we need more detail. I'm concerned about the time frame. Maybe if this was introduced a year earlier, there could have been time. We've got 16 weeks left in this parliamentary term. And just going back to the CAB Sex Victims Bill, and I think about my Regulation of Legal Services Bill, where I had to have 600 amendments at stage 2, that was fully scrutinised, and it took a long time to get it through until we got it to a stage that was agreed by the Parliament. And all I'm saying is this isn't a simple bill. This is very complex. We're dealing with people's lives here, and I feel it needs more scrutiny. But it'll be up to the Parliament to decide.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Rona Mackay, followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and panel. I want to raise the issue of brothel, so-called brothel keeping, which is not addressed in the bill. We have heard from sex workers that this would make them considerably less safe because they're no longer, they can no longer work together. I wonder if you could say if you're aware of that concern, and if you think that there is any way around that in terms of keeping the women safe. Could I have your view on that, please?
Yes. So I think one of the issues is that we need to consider the wider existing policies and legislations in tackling exploitation, and this is one that has been highlighted in terms of sex for rent, and any exchange of sex for accommodation is exploitation as well. And I think forcing at the moment with housing, engaged with sexual exploitation, we have the local authority do have powers at the moment, but this is also something that I think needs more consideration moving forward and consultation. And I know that officials are working with Police Scotland to undertake some work in this regard to raise awareness of sexual exploitation and also the short-term accommodation sector, which I think everybody's familiar with. And look, that's been ongoing this week. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to elaborate on the further work. I know it's ongoing into next year, if you wanted to.
I mean, I can confirm it's something we've discussed with Police Scotland, both in terms of operating the existing legislation, also some of the challenges around that, particularly short-term lets and elsewhere, and how that works. And it's part of that broader discussion we've been having with Police Scotland about what legislative change may be required to support that work. So it's an ongoing part of that. And that would be something, as I think as the Minister alluded to, and indeed our strategic approach says is something we would bring forward once we're in a position to ascertain what that scope of ask might look like, but also the ability to respond to changing circumstances, which legislation can mean. We're always catching up in particular areas, and how we can look at novel ways of addressing that as well. So that's part of that ongoing discussion, but we're certainly aware of those concerns.
Yeah, and as part of that, would that work? And I know there is a lot of work going on in the sphere of organised crime and human trafficking. So is that all part of the work that's been done in relation to brothels?
Yes, I mean, I think it goes back to the previous discussion around support networks. This is a holistic approach. It sounds a cliche, but we are working across service providers in government, nationally and locally, which is a challenge because it's not as been as joined up as it can be, which is one of the broader issues. And that's certainly been a challenge again internationally, where, although money is being provided, there hasn't been that linkage. So in a similar vein to support services, we're doing exactly the same in terms of the human trafficking strategy and serious organised crime, how we bring that together. So yes, it's very much a focal point.
So just briefly, just to go back to women's safety in relation to online business. Clearly, if the customers or the clients were criminalised, they are not going to give details which would enable women to screen them for safety measures. So, you know, I struggle to see how that could be. If they're not going to give details or feel they can't give details, how on earth could that be detected? You know, I mean, that's an issue that I think that it's been kind of overlooked, given that most business now is online. So if there are no personal details, how could a man be prosecuted? And I think that's an issue that the bill absolutely fails to address. I don't think there's enough emphasis on the way that the landscape's changed in terms of sex work. That's my opinion. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think I've raised these concerns, and I've alluded to it previously. It's an evolving world online. We have challenges today that we didn't have a decade ago, and we'll have new challenges in 10 years' time. But going back, and I know the Nordic model that was introduced in Sweden back in 1999, we didn't have the online business that we have now, and so that's not taken into consideration. And I think it's a huge worry these days that we have to be on top of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kavita.
Thank you very much. Fulton McGregor, and then I'll bring Katie Clark back in.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the Minister and your team. So as others have recapped, so Minister, you're saying that you agree with the principle in the bill of the criminalisation of buying sex. You don't agree with the quashing of offences, two of the main aspects of the bill, but we do have a bill here which at least partly meets the government's own position, but you have concerns which you've outlined. I guess my question is quite a general one. How do we square this circle? And is there anything that committee can do to help? I guess what I'm trying to ask with that, if I could just be as blunt, is would you and the government be open to suggestions that this committee will come up with in the Stage 1 report on a cross-party basis? And I say a cross-party basis because I really feel that this is very much a non-political party issue. Is that something that the government are thinking about? Are you thinking ahead to our Stage 1 report in terms of...
Yes, and I think that's why the Scottish Government, we remain neutral ahead of the Stage 1 report. We want to hear what the committee feels after all the evidence session, their views on it, their recommendations. I'm looking forward to listening to the member to see how she's going to address all the issues of taking through legislation. You know, it's an important part is listening and to see how you can adapt the legislation to work and get support. So yes, of course, I'm happy to consider what the committee recommends.
Thanks, Minister. That is really reassuring. Because one of the concerns that I've got is that we continue to go back over this area again and again. We've heard from those with lived experience on both sides of the argument already that they are tired of how they feel having to continually come in, speak to politicians and defend their position one way or the other on this, whether that's they want to continue to have the right to sex work, or whether they're against it and they want to see the aims of the bill pass. And I'm therefore concerned that a new approach, or if we do something new, might just feel like starting that again. So I wanted to ask, and I know it's probably too early to ask this because we're at Stage 1 and you've got a neutral position, but how confident would you be that the government can take this forward, perhaps in a new parliamentary session, and safely criminalise the buying of sex without continually having to revisit it? Is that something that's crossed your mind as well?
No, I can't commit to the next parliamentary session. I can't commit. It would be up to the new government. But I think, as I've said we've never ruled out legislation. It's just how we get it right. And the fact that it might be quite traumatic for some of the women coming forward as this legislation is coming through, for or against, to give their evidence quite bravely and as well. But I do feel if we do move forward with legislation, with all the other complex issues that we've got in support and how we're going to deal with past convictions, we need their voice at the table. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be in front of the public on TV and in front of committees and maybe in private sessions. But I would want their voice at the table because I want the lived experience on how we move forward and how we have the best legislation moving forward, which I would hope would not be as traumatic as maybe having to give evidence to committees.
Oh, okay, thanks for that. One final question, if that's all right. And Minister, I'll say at the outset, I appreciate this is a question as much for the member in charge as for yourself, and in fairness, I'll ask it to the member in charge next week as well, if somebody else doesn't beforehand. But I just wondered what discussions have the government and the member in charge had as this bill progressed, or in the earlier stages of the bill? Has there been any way to sort of, I mentioned earlier about squaring the circle, has there been any discussions at that level to try and do that?
So we had a few meetings in the initial stages with Ms Regan, in which I have raised the quashing and the detail about support that I raised with yourself. And I think Ms Regan thought it was up to the Scottish Government to provide that detail, which I strongly... that is not. It's a member's bill. It's up to the member to give the detail and for everyone to scrutinise that. If I had, as I said, if I had a Scottish Government bill, I'd expect scrutiny and people would be asking me questions on detail as well. And yes, and then we've just gone forward with the evidence sessions. But I haven't had any requests for a meeting recently.
Okay, thank you very much.
With me.
Katie Clark to be followed by, I think, Jamie Hepburn. You want to come back in with a supplementary.
Thank you. And I was wanting to ask a further question in relation to the potential new criminal offence. Would you agree that the central issue for this committee and for the Scottish Government is whether criminalising paying for sex is the right thing to do for society and for the women involved? And that the issues round about the difficulty of taking prosecutions from the evidence we have taken are very similar to the issues that are round about other offences such as rape and sexual offences, given the nature of those offences and this potential offence. Would you agree with that? That's the central issue, is whether it's the right thing to do.
Yes, and as I said in my opening statement, we are supportive in principle of that. It's just how we do it and getting it right.
Okay, but we wouldn't say that we know that, for example, there's very low conviction rates for rape, but nobody suggests that means it should be decriminalised. So the central issue is whether an act should be a criminal offence. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
And if it's okay, if I could ask just one further question about, and you've said that that you can't make a commitment to carrying this over to the next Parliament, but surely the SNP government should be making a commitment in terms of what it would do. And if you take the view that there simply isn't time because of the amount of work that would be involved in this bill, but also that there's so many other bills, and I have a member's bill myself, that there's so many other bills, surely you should be making the case that if the time genuinely can't be found in this Parliament, that this is an issue that should be allowed to be carried over to the next Parliament. Isn't that your role, to try and advance this bill as far as it possibly can be in this Parliament? And if it genuinely, in March, is in a position where it can't be enacted, then to make the case that it would be carried over, that the potential of it being carried over should be made available.
Okay. Just firstly, I don't think it's my role to push a member's bill forward as much as the Scottish Government can, because
it's a policy position,
yes, but
isn't it?
I have raised concerns. There are elements that we agree with and elements that we want further detail on. I think it would be a little bit premature for me to sit here and be dismissive of Ms Regan's bill at this stage, saying that we are going to commit going into next parliamentary term. It is something that I'm not against, and I'd be very happy if if the SNP were in government moving forward, but that would be have to come from the First Minister, of course. But I can commit that work will be ongoing on how we can legislate moving forward if this bill does not pass.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie Hepburn and then Liam Kerr with a follow-up question.
Thank you very much. Convener, this is a follow-on from the answer that you gave to my question around what types of substantial amendment would be required. Minister, the area you went on to was around the type of assistance and support that would that should be provided in the terms of the bill as legislated. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is there has been, I think, widespread support that there should be ongoing support and assistance for those who are involved in the selling of sex to be able to exit the selling of sex. It hasn't always been clear, though, precisely what that should constitute beyond having to be available on an even basis across the country. So I suppose, and I take the point that this is largely for the member in charge to answer in terms of what is intended, but do you have any sense of what that support should look like, maybe informed by the support that's available through Operation Begonia, for example? And also one associated question. I mean, clearly this provision would be predicated on trying to get women out of the selling of sex. I think we all understand that, but there has been a perspective articulated, including from those or at least one, maybe two people before us have given evidence who support the bill, and certainly those who oppose the bill, that support should be available for those who aren't immediately leaving the sale of sex. Do you agree with that as well?
I do. I think we need more detail. I know one of the provisions in the bill was also supporting women who leave Scotland as well. I want to have more further detail. How long that leaves Scotland? So I do believe that it's really important that we get the detail of the costings moving forward.
Not just the costings, though, presumably also what is intended in terms of the specifics.
The specific support as well. Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's something I'm sure we'll pursue with Ms. Regan when she's giving us evidence.
Yep. Thank you, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. The Minister expressed her concerns earlier on, I think in response to Sharon Dowie, that there was insufficient time to take this through, or she was concerned that there was insufficient time, and prayed in aid to other bills. Now, this bill has 11 sections, one of which is the short title. The Victims Bill, that she talked of, as drafted, had 72 sections plus schedules. The Regulation of Legal Services Bill had 93 sections and 3 schedules. It's my view the government has form for, if it wants to get something through, it will get it through. And I note that we will now sit in February. We won't take a February recess to ensure proper scrutiny of all the things going through. So can the Minister clarify why she thinks that this bill can't be properly addressed over the next 18 weeks? And if that's about consultation, as I think she's alluded to, who hasn't been consulted?
So firstly, I appreciate the different bills and the different sections, but what I was alluding to when I said I had concerns about it was when we have evidence sessions, it's up to the government or private members then to come back and say how they're going to address. And there has been a lot of issues that have been raised during the evidence sessions. I don't agree that the Scottish Government will just put legislation through. I think we take our time when we listen to members, and I hope the member will do that as well with her private members bill here. But I genuinely have concerns just regarding the parliamentary timetable. I think we're all aware about the amount of members' bills that are currently trying to go through, and the Scottish Government bills in the next 16 weeks. Oh, I thought it was 16. You said 18. I counted 16.
Convener.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can just come back in, Minister. I asked a question earlier with regard to one of the provisions in the bill that relates to repealing Section 46 of the Civic Government Scotland Act, and that relates to the offence of criminalising street prostitution, and you gave us a helpful response and indicated there was perhaps more detail that you could offer on that. So we have a little bit of time in hand, so it was just to maybe come back to that and ask if you can maybe just expand on your previous response.
Sure. Just in relation to the Section 46 offence, as I said, those for selling sex, and we do feel that would require further consultation and with stakeholders and communities, given the sensitivities and the complexities associated with prostitution. If we can just go into the general terms, conviction for a Section 46 offence is generally spent within a year at most, and it's not included in conviction information on any level of disclosure when it has been spent. I have a lot of detail when it can go into disclosure. I don't know if the committee is interested in me verbalising that or maybe sending that on. But
we do have a bit of time,
okay,
so I mean,
okay.
I'd be quite interested in that.
That's fine. So even in the unlikely scenario where a Section 46 offence was deemed relevant by the police for the purposes of a Level 2 PVG scheme disclosure, the individual would have the right to request a review of this or other relevant information before it is disclosed to an employer. An inclusion of such information is subject to a statutory test. I just need to reiterate the new Police Scotland approach does prioritise women's safety and routing them to support as opposed to trying to criminalise them, and convictions for such an offence are therefore less likely to be accrued given the general policing approach to such behaviour. I can provide further information on that. The same approach for this also applies if an individual is asked by someone, for example, an employer, to self-declare their convictions, and Section 46 conviction does not need to be self-declared once spent, regardless of the time of disclosure or the role. A system of disregards could be considered, which would introduce a process whereby convictions could be removed entirely from the ever being disclosed in the criminal records check. However, this would have to be developed for the bill. However, it's something that it could be considered. It's not something that we've been doing any work on. It would have to be for the member. A Level 2 with PVG, and that's commonly referred to as a PVG scheme, is a legal requirement for people in a regulated role with children or protected adults, for example, teacher, nursery or daycare worker, volunteer, childminder, social worker, doctor, dentist, sports coach, or adult care home worker. So a PVG scheme shows any unspent convictions, certain spent convictions, any notification requirements, unspent cautions, and other relevant information that is held by the police. And if you're on a barred list for work with children or adults, if you're under consideration for inclusion on the bar list for work with children or protected adults, or any prescribed civil courts order that you're a member of Protecting Vulnerable Groups scheme, and members of the PVG scheme are subject to continuous monitoring in that situation. Okay. But Level 2 from the barred list check. I'm sorry, Kaveh, do you want me to keep going?
I think we've got the gist of it. I wasn't expecting quite that amount of detail, but that is helpful. But I'm just very interested in, I think what committee has been hearing and what we're aware of is that there's a bit of a not quite a pick and mix of legislation, and some of it is utilised, some of it isn't. So I think at the moment I'm thinking about how we kind of consolidate a lot of that, and also with consideration to the provisions of the bill. So I'm just interested in what exists already and what the thinking is around the future of that existing legislation, yes, and how that works alongside the provisions of the bill, should it be enacted. So that's a helpful sort of update on that. We have a wee bit of time. I don't know if any other committee members want to come in. If not, I'll invite Ash Regan to come in.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. Operation Begonia is obviously the utilisation by the police and the government of the existing laws that we have on prostitution that we've had for some time, and that seems to be working very well. So we do have, if you like, laws criminalising sex buying, you know, if you consider the curb pulling legislation. But that is only able to target, we think, somewhere between 10 and 20% of this whole market of prostitution. As the Minister's picked up, prostitution has changed over the last few years, and most prostitution is now happening off-street, so it's happening indoors in various different settings. So if the Scottish Government recognises that prostitution is violence against women and girls, which the Minister has repeated here today and has done for over 10 years, and that off-street is now something like 80 or 90% of this prostitution market, and there's no laws at all to combat that violence that the government has said that they don't agree with, surely this is a good opportunity with this bill for the government to work with me and to support me to get this bill into law so that we can address this violence that is going on that the government says that they are opposed to.
So, yes, I think one of the things that the members acknowledged is the increase online, if it's 80% now, but it's also...
Not online,
off-street. But also with our discussions with Police Scotland and the Crown Office is how this is going to work operationally, and this is where we need more detail moving forward, and that's where we'll be happy to listen to your detail as you come back from stage one.
But can I just press the Minister there? So if we can get this into a position where the government are happy with it, because this is, you know, the principle, you do support the principle of challenging demand, you are opposed to violence against women. I'm pointing out that most of prostitution, there's no laws prohibiting this violence whatsoever. So if we can, will the government work with me to support to get this into law?
So it's a member's bill, it's your bill. So you'll be doing the work to do that, but I'm happy to have conversations with you. We're at a stage now, as I said, 16 weeks to go, that I've got several bills, several members' bills and government bills to get through in the next 16 weeks. So I don't have a team at the moment that could work specifically with yourself or any private member to get their bill through. But moving forward, if amendments are brought forward by yourself, we will definitely consider it.
Okay, so moving on to, there's obviously it's quite a short bill, as I think was pointed out very effectively by Liam Kerr there. So I would imagine there wouldn't be anything not like the number of amendments that we've seen on other bills that have gone through this Parliament recently. Survivors that have given evidence to this committee, the Casey report, so that was obviously a report that was commissioned by the UK government into grooming gangs, has recommended the removal of prostitution convictions for those that have been exploited in prostitution. And this was echoed very strongly by Scotland's justice agencies when they came in to give evidence to the committee, in their view that it was very important that Scotland send a message that women should not be criminalised, but that would be updated in law, not just in practice. Now, the Minister's obviously raised concerns with the quashing aspect. She's quite right to say that we've already had a discussion in private about this. And I am very open to looking at other ways that those convictions could effectively be removed, not by the process of quashing, but perhaps by another system, maybe by a pardons and disregards type system, which would achieve the policy aims, but perhaps do it in a way that the government is more comfortable with. So if the government supports the principle of criminalising the buyer and the principle of not criminalising the women, then surely that shows that the majority of the bill is supported by the government. And if we can come to an arrangement that suits the government on perhaps pardons and disregards, would that satisfy the government and allow them to support the bill?
I'd have to see the detail. I'm not committing the government to supporting the bill at this stage. I'm staying neutral at this stage, and once I have the detail, then we will consider that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Rona Mackay, you want to come in with a final question.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. It was to ask the member if in your opinion, and you said at the start of your questioning of the Minister there that you acknowledge that so much of sex work is now off-street, it's indoors or it's online. So in your opinion, do you think your bill as it currently stands reflects that, and it would be enforceable and workable with the clauses with the detail of your bill?
I think that
Yeah, a question. I think, Ash Regan, you're due to come into committee next week, so that might be the opportunity to ask Ms Regan then. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if there are no more questions, then we'll draw this session to a close. Thank you very much, Minister, and officials for joining us today, and we'll suspend for a few minutes just to allow our changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So our next item of business today is to commence our pre-budget scrutiny, and we're focusing today on prisons. So we've got one panel of witnesses today, and I intend to allow up to 90 minutes for this panel, and I refer members to papers 3 and 4. So I welcome to the meeting Ms Theresa Medhurst, Chief Executive, Linda Pollock, Deputy Chief Executive, and Amy MacDonald, Director of Finance, all with the Scottish Prison Service. So you're all very welcome, and thank you for sending your written submission. So I wonder if I can begin by asking a very general opening question, and I'll come to Theresa Medhurst. So, have you found funding for 2025-26 to be sufficient, and what are the main asks of your organisation for 2026 to 27? And if you're unsuccessful in your bid, what would be the consequences?
Thank you very much. Good morning, convener, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to attend for pre-budget scrutiny. I think there were 3 elements to your question, convener. So, in terms of the challenges for this financial year, we did get an increase on our budget from between 24-25 to 25-26. It was an uplift of 45 million, which was about 8.6%. But early into the financial year, there were other both inflationary pressures around utilities, and then the pay settlement meant that increase was going to be insufficient. So we applied for additional funding and received an additional 22.5 million on top of that 45 million in budget costs. So in that sense, over the course of the year, I would say we are managing within both the revenue and the capital budget as it stands at the moment. My concerns are probably around the degradation potential in the estate, given the population pressures that we are experiencing. We are not able to decant and carry out maintenance or other additional work that we would want to improve facilities. And given the wear and tear on our buildings at the moment, I think that has the potential to shore up problems for the future. And when people are incredibly busy just keeping people safe and focusing on being legislatively compliant, then it means the ability to spend in a way that we would normally is significantly reduced. So we are managing. The budgetary pressures have not been acute this year because of the additional funding that we've received. And we have made in-year bids for some additional funding around population pressures, and also our response to the FAI recommendation and recommendations and action points that came out of the FAIs into the deaths of William Lindsay-Brown and Katie Allen earlier this year. So all of that has been shared with government, and we are monitoring our spend against that as the year has gone on. In relation to the funding profile for next year, there are additional funds that we will be seeking, mainly around pay and staffing. Obviously, we have changes coming on with the changes in the contract for escorts, which commences in January. We have Highland, which will be completed late autumn next year. We also, though, have been working on what we call a prisoner pathway project, because we have seen an increase in the number of long-term prisoners coming into custody. I think it's around 600 in the last 2 years, but also that increased complexity. There has been requests for, we have diverted resource into shoring up some of that work, but going forward we know that there is likely to be a requirement for more, because even in the last 6 months I would say we've seen a shift yet again in that complexity. So there are a number of areas, including next year's pay offer, which is part of the 2-year deal, where we have highlighted to Scottish Government that we will require investment. But I think overall, from my position, because of that increased complexity of the population and the requirement for more focus on that pathway work with individuals in custody around rehabilitation and return to community, I do think that it will require more investment, not just next year but in future years. But those are as yet uncosted pressures on us. If we are unsuccessful, then I won't have enough money to run the organisation next year. So at some point the funding will run out. There is nowhere that I can see that we can cut back, particularly not given the population pressures. We are doing everything we can to maximise the amount of space, to provide support, to make changes in the operating day, to ensure that we have staff on shift at times when we require it, in order to be able to maximise time out of cell and give people access to service and rehabilitation programmes. Yes, so at the moment there is nowhere that I can see that I can make change, affect change, or reform in a way that would ensure that we had sufficient funding for next year if we are unsuccessful.
Thank you. And I think my follow-up question was actually going to be on the very points that you've set out there with regard to the impact of the prison population. And I think on the 5th of November, the information I have here is that it was at its highest ever level of 8,431. So it is interesting to hear a bit more detail of the impact of the prison population from a budgetary perspective. And I suppose within that, are you able to maybe provide a wee bit more detail with regard to what sort of kind of increase in funding you would be looking for to allow you to essentially continue caring for prisoners safely and humanely, consider the well-being of staff? Are you able to maybe just provide a little bit more detail on that?
Absolutely, and unfortunately, Convener, on the 11th of November, the population hit another high, and that was 8,441. That happened on the same day as we started the Emergency Early Release Programme, so the spike was short-lived, but nevertheless concerning. So we are seeing an increase year on year in social care costs, and obviously that is an area of additional requires additional funding. Our ability to manage the population pressures across the estate means that we require our escort provider to put on additional escorts to move people around, just to smooth out the areas where there are peaks and troughs. In addition to that, though, there are times, so we have what we call staffing complements that are agreed with our local unions for each establishment, safe operating staffing costs and complements. We have to increase those when the population rises, but there are other times when the establishments may require additional staffing, when there are, say for example, if there are incidents, and I know the committee have heard previously about drugs in prisons, but where we have a number of people who are under the influence, you can have 10, 12, 15 people who require 15 minutes observations. We require additional staff on to keep people safe. So there's a variability in the staff costs. Where I am concerned, though, I think, as I said, is that we are shoring up problems, I think, around maintenance in the buildings. So whilst we do have those staffing costs tied down, I think it's much more difficult on that. And then the prisoner pathway, I don't know, Linda, if you want to say a bit more about that in terms of what we're doing, but if I could bring Linda on the prisoner pathway, she'll be able to provide more detail.
Yes, of course. We have been working with the increase, as Teresa said, around long-term prisoners, but also an increase in those who have been given an order for lifelong restriction. We are seeing more impact with regards to the support for rehabilitation, for courses, for people moving through. So we have been directing resource to work through some of the backlog that was built up during COVID, particularly as well, to support people with their programmes, with offending behaviour courses, and to support work around progression, so how people can move through the estate, so we can get maximum use of the open estate, but also to prepare people for return to custody, to community, sorry. We have been directing work on that. We've been developing, as Teresa said, a pathway programme that will be individualised, risk-based, so we can respond and support people individually, but as you would expect, that requires a lot of resource and work with that. And I would want to just highlight as well, while we see an increase of requests for our staff and from population, that has a knock-on for our partners, both within National Health Service and also with social work, who are having to respond to those increases of demand as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's quite an interesting update, particularly with regard to the OLR. I know it's not, it does relate to budget, but I think separately we would be interested to maybe hear a wee bit more about the Pathways project by way of follow-up. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you for that. That's been really helpful to understand. And so I'll open up now and bring in Liam Kerr, followed by Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Looking at the resource budget, just following on from the Convener's questions, your submission says that you're at 107%, and that may have even been superseded, as you said earlier, total design capacity. And I think last year you needed in-year resource funding of £22.5 million to address the utilities and the pay policy and things that you mentioned earlier, Teresa Medhurst. As precisely as you can, what extra funding, what minimum figure do you need to see in the resource budget to run safely next year?
So we've done some high-level costing for the organisation, and as it stands at the moment, we think that we would require an additional 40 million. However, what I would caveat that by saying is that we did require additional in-year funding this year, and I wouldn't discount the fact that we may require that again next year, depending on how the population shifts and changes, because that is currently the greatest driver, I think, in all of the work that we're doing.
So let's take 40 million as a base figure that we will be looking at when the budget comes out. What is the implication if that's only flat cash? Or even below inflation resource increase? What happens then? Does it pause the body cams rollout, for example?
So there is potential for us to stop doing some of that work. That will not in any way, shape or form meet that budget pressure. It absolutely wouldn't. Because all of those are small costs in comparison with a figure of that size. And the other thing I would say, I know you've heard evidence from other parts of the justice sector around staffing costs, etc., etc. I mean, we are in a position where our prisons are full. I can't reduce staff and stop doing things because our prisons are full. I need the staff on the ground doing what they're doing. Therefore, we have to run as we currently run, and it would mean that we would run out of money in a year. That would be the reality, because there is no other alternative within the year. Recruitment, for example, we could slow down or stop recruitment, but it would mean that our prisons weren't staffed to the levels that they should be staffed to be safe. I cannot be in a position where I'm not staffing prisons to a safe level. So none of those options that may be unpalatable but may be options for other partners are available to us. Therefore, we will have to continue operating as we are. We'll look at, pockets of money that we might be able, but it will not meet that challenge. Absolutely not.
I understand. On the capital side of things, so HMIPS has identified Greenock, Dumfries and Perth as having, I think the quote is, extremely old infrastructure. Meanwhile, there's the replacement prisons at HMP Glasgow and Highland, which are delayed and over budget. Can you update the committee on what is the current position on Glasgow and Highland? How much extra are you spending to maintain the older prisons at an appropriate level? And again, what does the capital figure need to be to allow you and the staff to do the difficult job that we ask you to do?
So so where we are on Highland and Glasgow, so the Glasgow business case was signed off and that contract commenced earlier this year. The project as it stands is on time and on budget in the first year of the operation of that contract. So we are still on target for 2028 with Glasgow. In relation to Highland, there has been a slight delay advised by the contractor earlier, a couple of months ago, which was around precast concrete issues, but will not delay the project being completed next year. So that is still due for completion next year. The funding that we have requested from Scottish Government for next year covers off both the second year of the project costs for Glasgow, the final funding that's required for Highland completion, with additional costs for us around, as you say, the investment that's required in those older prisons. And we do have 5-year development plans for both Greenock and Dumfries. I would need to check for Perth. But we have got 5-year plans with costs attached for those. But that funding figure, whilst it includes replacement for degradation of items that's used in prisons. It also includes costs for maintenance and it includes our digital infrastructure as well.
And so, finally, if you can, what is the figure that needs to be in the budget for you to do all the things that you need to do in the next year? So
the overall, I'm jumping from one lot of figures to another, but the overall funding on capital would be 462 million.
I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Jamie Hepburn, then Rona Mackay.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Good morning to our panel. This question I've asked everyone that's come before us for budget scrutiny, so I'm going to ask yourselves it as well. What's been the impact on you as an organisation as a consequence of the UK Government's decision to increase national insurance employers' contribution?
So there's two areas that it has impacted on us. So obviously we received 60% as other parts of the public sector did in relation to the national insurance contributions. Because of the additional funding that we have seen come into the organisation. And
so maybe before you come back, maybe I didn't phrase my question properly.
Oh, sorry.
What has been the cost? What's been the sum total cost?
I don't think I've got just over 5 million.
5 million.
Sorry.
Please feel free to continue in terms of the point you're making. But I was wanting the top line first. But
right.
Please.
Okay. Sorry. My apologies.
No, I didn't phrase the question very well. Please carry
on. So where was I? I was talking about yes. So we did get So we got 60% of the costs met because of the way that the organisation has been operating this year, the pressure that we've been under. We have been able to find the remainder of that cost in year. But we have also had to find that cost in relation to the GeoAmey contract, where we changed the contract payment method from the contractual arrangements that were originally in place because of the failure in service delivery to what we call pass-through. And what that means is that we were paying for staffing to ensure that the staffing levels were up. So we didn't get that for the GeoAmey contract. But as I say, in the in-year cost pressure so far, we are managing within our budget.
There's a £5 million figure. Just as an approximation, how many prison officers would that pay for?
It's about 45. I'll ask Linda to work it out as we're sitting here.
If you don't have it right, you can come back to us.
Yeah, we'll come back.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Have that.
Okay. Another question, if I may, convener, on in your submission, you talk about one of the things you need more funding for is for the private prison operator at Addywell as a result of contractual requirements. Can you set out what the terms of the, and as much as you can, in terms of the contract and what that additional cost will be?
So the inflationary, it's above inflationary. Sorry. Right. Amy is probably better to. I can never remember. It's CPI, RPI, but it's RPIX is the inflationary mechanism that's used. So it is above inflation rate for Addywell, and it's not an exact figure in the sense that obviously we have to base it on an annual basis, depending on the inflationary rise. In addition to that, though, there are service credits, so it's not the final figure, if you know what I mean, but it is in the region, I think, of over £2 million for next year.
£2 million, and that's as a consequence of the contract that was signed in 2006?
Yes.
Okay, and the operator isn't obliged to soak up any of that cost? That's a cost that falls upon the public purse? There
is no way through the contract arrangements that we can shift the basis of that cost. We could ask them to come to the table to renegotiate, and I think there have been efforts to do so in the past, but it's not something that I think a contractor is going to respond to particularly.
When's that contract run until? Do you remember?
It's a 25-year contract, so
2031.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's longer than 2031. That doesn't seem right.
It was in your submission, I think. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. We can clarify that perhaps.
2032. You weren't far off. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much. Rona Mackay, then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Yes, I wanted to ask Ms Medhurst, you have spoken in the past, and you alluded to in your first response, about the complex nature of the prisoner population, and particularly in regard to an ageing population. So I wanted to ask what the budgetary implications of that are. And on the 29th of October, you were at committee here, and you spoke about the scoping work on different models of care for older prisoners and how that was developing. So I wonder if you had any more information on that, and particularly with regard to the budgetary implications.
So the costs and the cost of social care is probably the only cost that we have, because obviously there are implications for social work, there are implications for NHS as well. We don't hold those costs, so I wouldn't be able to provide that for you in the fullest sense, and I do think that's you know, it's a missed opportunity, because I do think there are significant implications for other partners as well. But certainly in terms of social care, we have seen since 21-22 an increase of almost £1 million in social care costs, which is obviously very concerning. And I think even though the numbers have risen from 44 to around 57 individuals who are being supported at the moment in custody, I think it's the complexity of the care needs that we are seeing now. And my concern would be that there are many people, and there have been various surveys and research pieces undertaken into the prison population to highlight the range of social care needs across the population. And I think that those statistics don't belie the actual need on the ground.
And does that £1 million fall to you? Did you mean that's extra to you or your social care partners?
No, that we find that cost. So that comes from our budget. And you know, regardless of who the individual is or their care needs, and obviously we do have challenges because of the provision of care across care services across Scotland. But sometimes it can mean that we are purchasing care support from providers in the Central Belt for up in the Highlands, for example, or other areas of Scotland. So it is quite a complex landscape, but the care that is provided is of an excellent standard, but it is more expensive.
So on that, do you have to have specially trained staff to deal with that on a daily basis, you know, out with the social care support that these prisoners get? Do you have to have people with sufficient first aid? You know, I know all your staff will have a basic level, but do you have to have specialised staff to deal with certain conditions? So
we train our staff as prison officers. That's what they are hired for. That's their purpose. And the main purpose for them is criminogenic need and risks rather than others. What we do is that we will provide additional training and support for those staff who are working in particular areas or with particular types of individuals. And they will source for themselves as well. They're usually pretty good at sourcing additional advice and support. Our NHS colleagues are incredibly helpful at ensuring that staff are provided with whatever information and or training. But we are not training them to be carers, because that's not their role. I think our NHS colleagues go beyond their NHS role to provide that care and support, because prison environments are challenging and quite different. But the other thing that we have, I feel some tap at the moment, but we have a lot of individuals in custody who will provide some social care needs and who are often friends of the individuals, and it does give them a degree more dignity because it is somebody that they know, and we have provided training to them in order to ensure that they are properly supported and able to provide social care in some quite challenging circumstances, I think. So it's through a range of different measures and supports, but it is probably more informal than formal.
And looking just on the wider long-term future, with the trajectory of older people coming into prison and having increasing health needs, do you think prison's the place for them, or is that something you think should be looked at in terms of radical changes going forward? Do you see you being able to continue if that trajectory continues?
I think we need to be really clear about the purpose of prison and the format that's required for different population types. I understand that those people who are coming into custody have committed crimes, and therefore there is a sentence that's associated. I suppose it is in what circumstances that sentence is then served and what purpose it serves, having them in the highest security facilities when that actually isn't required. And that could be constructed through either different types of facilities and or different types of licence arrangements, so that the sentence is still being served, but maybe not in the same kind of conditions that we are seeing currently.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Pauline McNeill, followed by Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Good morning. First question I wanted to ask you is, so you've told the committee that you need 40 million in order to keep running the prison service, essentially. That doesn't include what you might need in year. So as things stand, what is the shortfall in terms of the projected budget? Is the 40 million, that's what you've asked for?
Yes, yes,
I just wondered if you could put on the record what is it you've been, what's the proposal at the moment? Is there a shortfall, what the government have said?
So we haven't got a budget settlement yet. So all this is at the moment is the preparatory work for the budget discussions. So that's our high level estimates at the moment of what we will require, but we have no idea as yet.
There's no draft figures?
No, not as yet.
Could I ask you about the, I'm interested in the capacity of the new HMP Glasgow, which obviously is very, very important for the prison service. Now, from what I understand, there's the design capacity, the target operating capacity, and the extended operating capacity. So I'm trying to understand. So I can see the figures for for the current Barlinnie prison. Yeah. So obviously it's because you need to use the space and there's doubling up. Are you able to tell me now or later what these figures are in relation to the new prison? So I know the design capacity is 1,344. Yeah. So there's a bit of extra room. Does that mean there will also then be, as is now, a target operating capacity? And an extended operating capacity?
So at the moment we are operating on the 1,344 figure. I would not suggest that it would be wise to identify a figure just now for overcrowding a new prison. Right. Opening a new prison is always very complex and takes a significant amount of detailed planning to ensure, and particularly when you consider we are moving from one establishment which is incredibly old, antiquated. Right. We don't have a lot of digital infrastructure. We'll be moving to a new site, so staff will have to work in quite a different way. And operate. They need to become familiar with all the new operating systems as well as the structure, because the layout will be markedly different to the layout at Barlinnie just now. All of that takes a lot of time and planning and preparation. So from my perspective, at the moment we would be planning on a phased opening, because that's how we've always opened our prisons, to ensure that at each phase, we know that the prison is stable, secure, operating and functioning as it should before we move on to the next phase. So planning to overcrowd at the moment, I would suggest, would not be wise.
If I may, we've tried to simplify, because I'm conscious we had a lot of different figures that were used across establishments. We have changed that, so we have the design capacity for all of our establishments, and we've taken away kind of the target operating. What we now have is what we call the assessed capacity tolerance, and that's for us the very, very maximum that we can do. So we have a design capacity for each establishment, which is what it should be sitting at, to be able to support to the best levels of the support and care we need for people. We have then, as we are just now, gone around all of our establishments to see where we can double up and put in people on top of that, which is what we now have as the assessed capacity tolerance, which is our absolute limit it is not where we want to be. So it's to be really clear that that assessed capacity tolerance, which is talked about quite a lot in terms of an upper limit, isn't something that we want to be at. It is above what we think is the best operating level for our establishments. So as Teresa said, for Glasgow, we have the design capacity, and that's what it is built to support. But we have tried to, because there were so many different numbers and terms being used, that was confusing. We have moved to design capacity and then the higher number of assessed capacity tolerance, but that is very much above and beyond where we should be, but what we can try and safely manage within the space that we have.
No, thanks, that's helpful, because you're right,
It's
there is
a
a
lot.
table
Yep.
and it's got these 3 figures, design, target and extended, but you're saying done away with that now and it's
To try and make it
design
easier to
and
use.
it's assessed capacity tolerance, right, that's helpful. Just lastly, just on a different subject, I wanted to ask you about the Scottish Courts Custody and Prison Escort Service. So I understand that you're retendering for this contract and that GOA don't intend to bid for the new contract. I just wondered if you could provide any update on the process and if there's any implications for the budget in this regard.
So we are still going through the process to award the contract. So I obviously can't, because it's contract in confidence, there's not much of that I can provide. What I would say is that from my perspective, I think the way that we have run the retendering process, it's gone well. And obviously we have factored in costs for next year's budget for the new contract. Yes.
Thanks. I have a vague recollection that the GOA had raised concerns about not budgeting around about the COVID period where prisoners were not moving or moving in different ways, and then there's the whole change to the justice system where there'll be more virtual attendance. Are these some of the factors that change the nature of the contract and why GOA might not be willing to bid again, do you think?
So I think there were definitely factors related to the changing landscape, and whilst we tried to ensure that they were protected in the sense that we were able to provide them with funding during COVID, which meant that they could retain their staffing group without losing them. I think there were, though, elements about how GOA may operate. The attrition rates of the staff were fairly high, but they are now in a position whereby the staffing levels have improved significantly, performance has improved significantly, the contract is operating well. The reasons why they've decided to step away are for them. That's not something I could comment on. But what I would say is that going forward, the lessons learned from that have been factored into the new contract to ensure that we don't end up in the same circumstances again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sharon Dowie, followed by Katie Clark.
Okay, good morning. We heard detailed evidence during our inquiry into the harm caused by substance misuse in prisons around the work that SPS is doing to address the introduction of illicit substances into the prison estate. And you mentioned drone detection technology in your written submission. Is your current budget sufficient to address these threats? And if not, what more is needed?
So we have factored into our budget funding not only for technological solutions, but continue with the rollout of the grills on the windows. Our assessment of the impact of that so far has been positive, so it is our intention to continue with that. The issue with drone technology, we've factored, again, a figure into our budget submission, but the issue there is that the technological solutions and technological landscape is shifting so quickly and in so many different ways, it's really difficult to see where we're going to land. But we have been engaging with various contractors, various parts of the sector, as well as with colleagues down south, to try and identify solutions that will be more effective than those that we've trialled in the past.
So what you've got in the budget, is that sufficient?
It should be sufficient for the next financial year, because we still not landed on a final solution, if that makes sense. Because of we don't have a technological solution that we can see this is the one that will do it and it'll last, you know, for the remainder of the financial year. We're still in that scoping phase, but we have factored in costs that we think would equate with a technological solution.
Okay, thank you. And just another question, kind of following on to the questioning that Rona Mackay had done, a report from Wendy Sinclair-Gibbons mentioned the need to change the approach to managing a more complex prison population. And you'd actually mentioned in your response to her about you needed different types of facilities, maybe different types of licence. And to be clear, obviously people are in prison because they've committed a crime and they're there for a reason. But there are a rise in the complexity of the people that are populating the prisons. So what stage are the conversations at on the different types of estate that you need? And is there enough in your budget that you would maybe be able to progress any of that? I would liken it to like a secure care home because of the condition of some of your prisoners. So is there ongoing conversations just now, and is there enough in the budget to progress that?
So I'll bring Linda in on that one. If that's
Thank you. And you'll know from previous discussions, obviously, we have the model for women in custody in Scotland, which is quite advanced and a type of a different model with the Stirling facility, the community custody units. We're really keen to learn from that as well for other population cohorts. We are working with Scottish Government colleagues, particularly around social care, and could there be a different model, particularly for those who require social care. We are also very keen to look particularly at young people. Scotland, I think, when we look at the admirable decrease of the amount of young people that are in custody, that has left us with a smaller number, but they are complex young people, and we're likewise again working with Scottish Government around that group of young people and what would be the right type of model for custody for young people. We are very clear also, and we've spoken before about rise of serious organised crime. We've been working, and particularly with some of our colleagues across Europe, to look at models that they have there. So all of these are being factored into conversations with Scottish Government around what the potential future modelling could look like. All of that has to go hand in hand from an estates and point of view with what the population will be. From there, we are seeing a continuous increase, obviously, within population, significantly around long-term prisoners and those with sexual offences. So trying to model all of this, and it would be looking, we've seen the recent statistics from the court service coming out about what's within the court backlogs, looking to the future of what do we know is coming, what can we anticipate, and how do we design a model from an estates, but also a way that we can support people on their rehabilitation and their journey as well. Looking at what we've done for the women, but also the model that's designed for Glasgow is a very different type of model in terms of the house blocks that we have there, building on best evidence, so that we can have smaller cohorts, so that we can engage more closely, we can work with them within their groups and support them on their rehabilitation. So all of that has been factored in, but it's very much a longer term model around what would be required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Katie Clark.
I'd like to ask about rehabilitation and pre-release planning. And we know we've got very high numbers of people in prison in Scotland. Theresa Medhurst, you've already spoken about the purpose of prison. So if we accept that one of the purposes of prison should be to try and reduce reoffending, could I maybe ask you a bit about what more could be done and what the budgetary implications are? I know we've already heard from Linda Pollock in terms of some of the work, but we hear regularly about the inability of prisoners to get access to programmes, and you've set out in your written submission the impact of the prison population on your ability to carry out rehabilitation work in prison. So could you perhaps say a little bit more about budgets and whether there are specific groups that you believe need to be prioritised in terms of the work roundabout rehabilitation and planning for release? Because we know that the more planning there is, the evidence seems to suggest the less likely they'll be reoffending. If I go to the...
So I'll start off on that, Ms Clark, and then I'll ask Linda to come in. So I think, I mean, you've asked a really interesting question, because we obviously talk about population, but there are different groups within our population. We concentrate a lot on our long-termers, and obviously because they are with us for a long time, the costs there, because of their risk profile, are much higher. But equally, that short-term cohort are people who are, it's an unfortunate term, but we call them, revolving door individuals who continually come in and out of custody, and what you want to do is break that cycle with them. But equally, there's a remand population, and that larger remand population, because of the different legal position that they are in, but equally because of funding, we would require additional funding to be able to provide services and supports to them in the same way as we do, either for short-termers or for long-termers. And I'm afraid I don't have costs for that, but if we were asked to look at it, then I could provide, we would obviously look at what the cost of that is likely to be. Where services and supports are available, and where we recognise that there is more that we can and should be doing, is around that long-term population and that prisoner pathway work that Linda referred to earlier. We have already invested additional money into that. We have a programme of work over 5 years. It is very complex because you're not just talking about our operational staff, but you're talking about psychology input, you're talking about health input, justice social work as well. So the funding profile would sit with us for the vast majority of it, but not all. I don't know if you want to say a bit more around what additional costs we have.
The other area I would flag, as we've spoken about before, around short-termers and the emergency release programmes that have been running, and you will know from the previous tranches of emergency release, there was a lot of work put into pre-release planning, recognising that would be quicker for some people, but working particularly with third sector partners and through care supports to be able to support people from that. You will know yourself that the statistics about the returns for short-termers back into custody, we did see that number come down through for the emergency release, which we put down to some of the pre-release planning. So we are learning from that for these tranches of emergency release, but also support that we can provide more generally for people in the run-up to release to support them for their re-entry into community.
Thank you. And that further information would be really helpful. But could you also say anything that you are able to provide in terms of the financial impacts on other areas of the criminal justice system, of the failure to rehabilitate people whilst they're in prison? Is that something that you've done any work on, or would be something you'd have a view on?
There obviously are impacts, and particularly for every part, if even for long-termers. So I'm just trying to think through how best to frame my response to your question, Ms. Clark. But for that shorter-term cohort, there will be, I suppose, a way of looking at how often they are in contact with the court system again, and that will have an impact on police, procurator. So, there may be a way of doing it. I think it would be fairly complex, but it's not something that we've looked at.
Yeah, and could I maybe just ask a final question that's specifically about sex offenders? And we know that there is an awful lot of debate about programmes and about whether it's possible to have effective ways to rehabilitate, if you like, sex offenders. And I wonder if you could say something about the amount of resource that as an organisation you put into that, its effectiveness, and any implications in terms of budgets if there was an attempt to expand any of that work.
We don't define our resource in that way. We don't separate out the costs per population type. It's an interesting point, though, particularly because we know that the growth that we are likely to see over the next few years is going to be in those who are convicted of sexual offences. They do require more in some respects, more intensive support around the type of programme delivery, but it's not just about programmes. It's also about the multidisciplinary case management process that sits alongside them, as well as the planning for their return to communities. Given the nature of the offences, that return to community planning part is more challenging than for our mainstream population for a variety of reasons. And I do think it's an area of work that is going to require more concentrated time and consideration from all of the justice partners, given that we know we're going to see an increase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Fulton McGregor, and then I think there's a few follow-up questions from members. So, Fulton.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Good morning. Still morning to the panel. I've got a question on fatal accident inquiries, but before I do that, I know you've already spoken about the social care aspect as an issue that I'm really interested in. I think it's just sort of changing the whole shape of prison care. Have you got any idea how much of those costs, in terms of social care, you're incurring, how much are falling in the NHS? Where's the overlap? Where is there anything that can be done there to you know, in that space?
So I can provide the cost of social care to the prison service. I can't provide those costs to the NHS. And the NHS, I'm sure if they were here, would say that they are not social care providers. But I do know that they provide a lot of input and support for some of the health conditions that those individuals require. So I'm not sure how they would be able to distill that down, but certainly from our perspective, we would be able to provide the social care costs.
Is that something you can provide to the committee? Is that
Sorry?
something you can provide to the committee in writing?
Yes, I can. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that I've often thought about, I should declare an interest. My wife works at the State Hospital. The State Hospital is an example where it is a high secure facility, but it is health-based and health-run. Do you feel that there is other aspects of prisoner care that could move to that basis? And that's, I take it, more a policy question than on the budget. But how do you think such a move could impact prison budgets in terms of moving forward?
I suppose it would depend what kind of construct was developed. And I should say at the outset, we are not social care experts, and you know, we rely on partners to advise us on what kind of service and support is required. Even if you look at, you know, within prisons, it's just a social work, and again, you know, their area of expertise is not around adult social care. So even within that construct, again, there's another complexity. So I mean, I could imagine, you know, a different type of facility. Linda alluded earlier to, you know, the different model of custody for women, a different type of facility which was much more aligned to sort of care home facilities, which probably would require a different model of staffing profile to those that currently exist within our prisons at the moment. But you might also have something that looks at licence conditions for individuals, where you know, their ability to move around and access community and potentially reoffend is fairly restricted. So I think it is a policy question. It's not for me to say, but I could see quite a different model that would be better suited to those individuals' needs, but also ensure that the sentences provided by the courts are fulfilled.
Yeah, thanks very much. And moving on to my more substantive question for the day. You did set out within your submission that you think a resource increase is needed in terms of additional costs to support the implementation of the FAI task force recommendations. Could you set out what that resource requirement is, what it covers, and the implications in terms of deaths in custody if you do not have the budget to implement these recommendations?
So, thank you for the question, Ms McGregor. So, since the determination and the recommendations were delivered. We have set up a task force within the Scottish Prison Service, but that task force has different work streams which are being led, some by our own staff, but some by expertise that we have seconded into the organisation from NHS, from Scottish Government and other sectors. And we have worked at pace to develop a range of, I suppose, responses that should meet the recommendations that were set out by the court. What the stage that we're at, though, what that's highlighted is that there are different elements to this. So we've got in-cell technology, we've got the piloting of the ligature toolkit, we've got the revision of overhaul of our suicide prevention strategy, our anti-bullying strategy. All of that will have training requirements and potentially resource requirements for staffing. So whilst we have pursued all of that work at pace, and we will produce reports on and updates to the timescales identified, what we will not be able to do at that stage is properly identify what the resource costs are likely to be. And that will have to be work that's undertaken post all of the work being completed to meet the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can maybe just come in with a couple of questions. My first one is on early release and new legislation. So obviously there's been new legislation enacted with regard to early release as opposed to emergency release. I'm just interested again in the sort of budgetary impact on Scottish Prison Service on facilitating the early release of prisoners under the new legislation. If that figure, if roughly that cost is available, that's obviously that release processes in terms of the emergency release, and the ongoing early release is underway now. So interested just to understand a bit about what the cost of that is to the Scottish Prison Service, if you're able to sort of broadly share that with us.
So I don't have that cost with me. I can write to you separately. So what we would be able to do is identify costs to prepare for the implementation of the legislation, the ongoing costs, unless there were additional costs, and I don't think there were any. Okay. But I would be happy to write to the committee separately to provide that information.
Yeah, that would be appreciated. Just my second question relates to, and just during this session this morning, we've spoken a lot about the size of the population, but we've not really dug into, obviously, the sort of distinctions between convicted population, remand population. We've spoken also about long-term prisoners and your pathway, the pathway work. I'd just be interested to know, again, from a budgetary perspective, if there are elements of the population that really are sort of budget intensive, if you like, or really is that quite difficult to sort of nuance that?
It's not something that we undertake as an organisation. What I would say, though, would be that you've mentioned order of lifelong restrictions, and we know that the type of intense management that's required for them does come, and it will come as additional resource cost. But as I say, we don't have a breakdown on that. There are other portions of the population, but it really comes down to more so to individuals' risk and individual needs profile, where we have individuals who will be far more resource intensive to manage, either for the duration of their sentence or for particular parts. But what we do know is that over the course of a sentence, then long-term prisoners are more resource intensive than short-termers, and short-termers will often decide whether or not they want to engage because they have got a definitive date at which they know they will be released. And then for remands, as I say, the legislative framework is slightly different, but it's not something that we've ever been asked to consider.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose just staying on this kind of nuances of the population, we know that the community custody units have been a really excellent model to introduce in Scotland. So I suppose my question is, are there any intentions to alter that model just in the context of budgetary constraints, or is that something that is really proving its value in Scotland? And if anything, we would like to see that expanded in years to come.
So I think in response to your question, Convener, we are still in the early stages of the operation of the community custody units. So I think from our perspective, we would want them to be open for at least a 5-year period in order to ensure that we do understand fully and give them time to embed, because it is a distinctly different way of operating, both prisons for our staff, for communities. So we want to be able to maximise the learning and identify thereafter how that then can be taken forward, either in part or in whole, to other population sectors or segments across the organisation.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think, Liam Kerr, you'd like to maybe come back in with a follow-up.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just a very quick one, if I may. And it was on the questions that I think Pauline McNeill was asking earlier on about the new prisons. And Pauline McNeill was talking about Highland specifically, which I think you said to me earlier was due to open next year.
So it's due for completion next year.
Right. So, but at the point when it does open, I think in response to Pauline McNeill, you were saying it would be staffed with broadly the people who are currently in Inverness. You will use the same. Now, that will necessarily come with the training cost that you identified, but also, if there's greater capacity in there, there will need to be a recruitment exercise. So, with all of that is extra cost. So, has that figure been factored into the 40 million increase that you've required on last year's resource figure? And if not, what is the extra figure to open the new prison?
So thank you, Mr. Kerr. The new establishment will require additional staff because obviously we're moving from 100-place prison to 200 places. So we have done a lot of modelling and profiling and planning around that, and particularly planning around how we would look to increase the staff complement in advance of Highland opening. It will require dual operation for a short period of time, and we're still working through the operational plans to determine that. But that additional staffing requirement has been factored into the budget for next year.
Right. So it's within the 40 million, isn't it?
It's within the fuller budget submission that we have provided. Where that 40 million pressure sits, you could segment it any way that you want it. Is it the additional staff for Highland, or is it this, or is it that? If we don't have that money, there are things that we cannot do, but Highland will need to open.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can just finish off, if there's no more questions from members, I wonder if I can just finish off with a question that evolves from, I suppose, a bit of wider work that the Parliament and committees within the Parliament is undertaking, looking at the work that public sector organisations have underway with regard to meeting our sort of climate change targets and reducing emissions within specific sectors. So I'm interested maybe just to hear a wee bit about what is what's being undertaken within the Scottish Prison Service, and importantly whether you anticipate that that would require an additional resource and requirement or cost to allow that work to continue.
So what I would say is that we are obviously our responsibilities for climate change we take very seriously, and in relation to our new builds, all of that has been factored into the facilities. So you know, the closure of Inverness and the closure of Berlin will obviously have a significant impact, and the new facilities will meet all of the new legislation and all of the targets required. We do have ongoing projects within the organisation, and we do require capital funding to support those. So we have factored in for this year and for next year. We have done for many years, but for next year's budget we have increased the funding that we require in order to meet our climate change obligations.
Okay, I suppose where we're coming from in particular is obviously there's a great opportunity within the new estate development, but also understanding the challenges associated with the older estate. And I suppose importantly, what if there is a requirement for additional funding resource to, I suppose, allow you to keep the older estate wind and waterproof, never mind reduce our carbon emissions, if there's what the cost implications of that might be. And I guess it maybe goes back to the point that Liam Kerr was asking about in terms of whether or not that would be met within the amount that you quoted earlier on, the 40 million additional that you're seeking.
So you're absolutely right. The older estate, I mean, as construction has taken place to develop existing prisons and build new prisons, then we've kept pace with changes in legislation and expectations, up to and including obviously Stirling that recently opened, but Highland and Glasgow as well. In relation to in HMP Inverness and HMP Berlin, I have no costs for what we have done is profile the costs of the investment required to maintain the prisons up to the point at which we know they will be replaced by Highland and Glasgow.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that. That's helpful to understand. Okay, if there are no more questions from members, we'll draw this session to a close. Thank you very much indeed. That's been really helpful. So thank you for joining us today. And that concludes the public part of our meeting. And we'll now move into private session.